Welcome to the Licensing and Regulatory Committee on the 10th of August 2021. As with other council meetings, this meeting will be webcast, including public participation speakers. First, I'd like to thank Councillor Mason for all the work he did for the 2 years that he was chair. From where I was, he was a very proactive chair. So I'd like that recorded, Fiona, please. Apologies. We've had apologies from Councillor Barker, Councillor de Gaulle, Councillor Looker, Councillor Mason and Councillor Norman. Are there any other apologies that we're aware of? Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No. Agenda item 2 then, the minutes of the last meeting. Are they an accurate record? Yes, Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chair. Can I propose a few amendments, please?
Certainly.
Councillor Wells is listed as Vice Chair, but I'm Vice Chair and was at the time of the meeting. In the second paragraph, it's recorded that the Chair welcomed me to the role of Vice Chair, but the thanks to Councillor Wells aren't recorded. Can we please record that as well?
Excellent.
The speakers are listed by name, but they were both speaking, as well as speaking as individuals, they were speaking on behalf of organisations. So Ian Mitchell was speaking on behalf of the York Sight Loss Council, and Anna Baldwin was speaking on behalf of York Disability Rights Forum. Can that please be recorded as well? I've confirmed that with both the organisations, and those speakers were speaking on behalf of those organisations. So could that be recorded, please? And then on the item about Hackney Carriage fare changes, I don't feel like what's in the minutes is an accurate recording of what happened. So I'm just trying to find the page. Yeah, on page 5 of our papers. It's so firstly it says that Councillor Waters moved and Councillor de Gaulle seconded. It was actually me who seconded it. And then it says that we voted unanimously in accordance with option 1 to publish in local newspapers for a specific period of 14 days. We said that it should be advertised for at least 14 days in a local newspaper and on the council website and on the council social media platforms. So can that just be amended just for accuracy, please?
Certainly. Thank you. You got that, Fiona? Yeah. Thank you. Any other points of accuracy on the minutes? Thank you. So I'll sign those amended minutes as an accurate reflection of the meeting. Item 3 is public participation. We have 7 speakers this evening, and they will be speaking to us via Zoom, but without us being able to see them. So I'll call on the first speaker, which is Mr. Lee Ward, who's speaking on agenda items 4 and 8. Mr. Ward, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
Carry on in your own time.
Thank you, Chair, and elected members. This and many other committees across the country rely on officers to provide an unbiased, accurate and factual report to assist them in the democratic decision-making process for the betterment of their constituents. However, while the reports regarding cross-border that have been supplied to date are for information only, it is far from unbiased or accurate, and dare I say, border on the misleading. It could be argued that they were written relying on the committee's trust in the author. Since the agreement made between West Yorkshire and York licensing authorities to enable enforcement officers to inspect or even suspend licenses from other areas, we believe that this has caused a conflict of interest for York's licensing department. And that is why they are fighting against what the trade see as a public safety concern, which they simply do not have the heart to support the localism of the regulations that govern this trade. After all, the High Court recognised that localism is the hallmark of the trade's regulation and public safety. Although I have only studied law for 2 years, I find it amazing that these reports are signed off by York's senior solicitor when the case law that they refer to never mentioned, let alone argue the trade's concern of where a vehicle is licensed and where it is made available to accept work. Law proceeds by analogy, principle and degrees, but the cases referred to are not relevant to the trade's argument, and therefore these cases are completely misleading and deflecting to this committee to such a degree that they should have been under the heading of the straw man argument. To bring Uber's employment tribunal into the equation beggars belief. We are not interested in Uber and what they do. This is about the drivers who make themselves available for work where they shouldn't, and we need to be very clear on that. Any licensed driver from any area can pick up, drop off or travel through York without offence. This has been recognised with the term the right to roam, but they cannot, and I repeat, cannot make themselves available while in York to accept a booking from any operator. That is the argument, and that argument is being deflected by the officers that are relied upon to uphold the law that governs this trade in York. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. We take that into consideration when we discuss the item. Our second speaker is Mr. Mark Jennings, who is again speaking on items 4 and 8. Can you hear me, Mr. Jennings?
I can, Chair. Thank you.
In your own time.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from what Mr. Ward has just said, I'd like you all to imagine, I'm going to make the section 46, the offence that he's talking about, very simple. I want you all to imagine a circle. That circle is the area of York. So in that circle, we're going to imagine a man in a box and a car with a driver. A customer communicates to the man in the box, the operator, and when I say communicate, he can use whatever form of communication he likes. He can use carrier pigeon, smoke signal, phone or an app. It matters not. This was said by Justice Gillygate in a recent case. The communication does not matter. There just has to be a communication. So the operator then takes the booking from the customer, he then communicates that booking to the car. The car then, as Lee just said, can go anywhere he likes in the country to pick up that customer wherever the request is happening and drop him off where he likes. What he cannot do is make himself available in an alien area that he's not licensed for when empty. Now I've said that, I want to read you what Lord Chief Justice Hickinbottom once said. And he said this: the operation is geographically fixed in the operator's licensing area, the circle. That area must be where the premises are located, the man in the box, bookings made, and from which vehicles are dispatched. Which vehicles are dispatched? Not outside that area, they have to be dispatched from within inside that area. I'll go on to what Lord Justice Latham said, and to say that we've studied law, and this is quite an understatement, but this is what Lord Justice Latham said to Miss Sherry Blair, the ex-Prime Minister's wife, who was Miss Booth QC at the time of this thing. And Miss Booth's construction of the Act was that you could get licensed anywhere in the country by a licensing authority such as York. Once you have that license, you can go and operate wherever you liked, and the vehicles could as well. Well, this is what Lord Justice Latham said to that. That would, in my judgment, drive a coach and horses through what appears to me to be the central principle of this legislation. So it's a Lord Chief Justice and Lord Justice. I'll go on to something else, that when we were trawling the archives of Parliament to find every possible minute of every possible meeting, including the Hansards, to come up to find out exactly what Parliament meant when they made this Act. To say we have studied this is, please don't underestimate the lengths we have been to. And look, the Earl of Mansfield puts this in quite a deliberately and accurate way. And he says this: immediately returning to his own area of completion of a hire. This ensures that the blatant abuse of deliberately stationing vehicles in another licensed area can be dealt with appropriately. Last but not least, I want you to now consider Section 12 of the Transport Act of 85, and it says this: use of taxis and hire cars in providing local services. Section 12(1). Where the holder of a licensed taxi or private hire vehicle states in his application that he proposes to use one or more licensed taxis or hire cars to provide a local service. Now you know this and you've just heard what I've just said. How can a licensed vehicle that's licensed in Leeds provide a local service in York? Thank you.
Item. Third speaker is Mr. Lorry. Are you there, Mr. Lorry?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am. Thank you, members. You do have many speakers. You've got lots of information and a particularly important decision to make tonight. My focus is on out-of-town working, the view of the police, and the ease of obtaining evidence. York Police say, "We will support our partners and work within our powers," which means that North Yorkshire Police need a decision from you. They are willing to stop vehicles, gather evidence, and submit reports in order to support your enforcement powers. Within your report, it is suggested that it is perfectly legal for these drivers and vehicles to work within York. It is, of course, perfectly legal to complete a pre-booked job to pick up or drop off within York. What is not legal is for drivers licensed within one area to come and sit around in another licensing area appearing to be available for immediate hire, as this is simply an electronic form of hailing. Recently, this topic was discussed on a national forum where it was said it would be stupid to suggest that a vehicle can be booked to go to York, but cannot be booked to collect them. In answer to that comment, it was made perfectly clear that both journeys would be perfectly legal. What is not legal is for that vehicle to sit around in York whilst waiting and hoping to receive another booking. This is an extreme example to simplify the issue and the importance of your decision tonight. There is a quick and easy way to satisfy both the balance of probabilities and the beyond reasonable doubt test. 3 questions easily satisfy burden of proof when stopping vehicles as they enter your area. 1. Do they have a passenger on board? 2. Can they show evidence of a pre-booked fare? Or 3. Are they off duty? If the answer to any of those questions is no, then it is clear that there is no legitimate reason to cross your boundary, and they can indeed be asked to leave and be reported. Their intention can only be to make themselves appear to be available for immediate hire. To summarize, the presence of the vehicle, being legal or not, is based on a simple question. Are they fulfilling a pre-booked journey and therefore working, or are they hoping to receive a booking and therefore actively looking for work or plying? Remember, these are private hire vehicles. Do you choose to allow this practice to continue or not? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Lorry. Your comments will be taken into account when we discuss that item. Our fourth speaker is Angie Clarkson. Can you hear me, Ms. Clarkson?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Indeed.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me a Hackney Carriage drive from London to address the meeting. United Trade Action Group has been granted permission to judicially review Transport for London's decision to grant a licence to Cap10, a private hire app who are now displaying their vehicles on FreeNow, until recently a purely Hackney Carriage app. Mr. Justice Tahir refused permission in the first instance, citing it was too similar to the Reading case and unarguable. At an oral appeal, Mrs. Justice Lang gave permission, stating it's very arguable and not affected by Reading. Now, I realise York comes under the 76 Act, which does not apply to London. However, there are marked similarities in both areas appertaining to how Uber and drivers ignore the regs, whether they be the 76 or 98 Acts. We have met our colleagues in York and Medway to discuss a possibility of them initiating a 46(1)(d) prosecution. People have said Reading has killed that. Well, Reading, in the opinion of eminent QC Gerald Gillygate, is not the end of either our apply for hire argument in London or York's 46(1)(d) argument in Yorkshire. Mr. Justice Flo found that Mr. Ali's parked vehicle was not displaying any markings or contact number indicating it was a private hire vehicle, and thus dismissed Reading's appeal. Importantly, though, the 76 Act and 46(1)(d) was not part of the case, and no mention of commissioning the invitation to accept bookings in a controlled area was made. It was purely judged on whether Mr. Ali was displaying availability by virtue of being recognised as a private hire vehicle. We have had 3 QC's opinions, including Gerald Gilligate's, and they all say Reading has not killed either argument. Uber are now launching a Part 8 declaration in London, claiming they are only the agent in the booking process and the driver is the principal. Well, Chair, if that's the case, it follows that every driver should hold an operator's licence in their own right. If this is not the case, then they will be illegally applying for hire. This case will be heard in November, and United Trade Action Group is a defendant. Too many regulators refuse to stand up to Uber, but instead stand up for Uber. I would urge York to be the regulator who stands up to them and initiate a prosecution under 46(1)(d). Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Clarkson. Your comments will be taken into account when we discuss that item. Our 5th speaker is Mr. Tony Green, again speaking on items 4 and 8.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair. Can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Lovely, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. If the aim of a local authority when licensing taxi and private hire drivers and vehicles is to protect the public, then you have to ask why public protection officers would look to suppress a legal opinion carried out on behalf of North Yorkshire Police. There can only be one reason. If we include North Yorkshire Police's most recent legal opinion, there are at least 4 that I'm aware of that agree Uber in York are operating in contravention of section 46(1)(d) of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976. There's only one that doesn't, York City Council. By suppressing the details of the legal opinion gained by no less than North Yorkshire Police, public protection in this instance is working against the public by not allowing people to make an informed choice when they choose who to book their taxi with. We sometimes need to remind ourselves why legislation was introduced in the first place. Prior to the 76 Act, the private hire industry was a dangerous free-for-all. It sometimes feels we're heading back that way, especially when you see what was brought to light during the most recent enforcement action. York is seen as a soft touch by drivers of out-of-town cars, while at the same time applying stringent conditions on its own York licensed drivers and vehicles, and rightly so. So members, when making your decision, please ask yourselves and the officers involved why. Why would they choose to hide the truth with the potential implication for taxi users with regard to, say, insurance, if they were involved in an accident in a vehicle that shouldn't have been here? Many thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Your comments will be taken into account when we discuss the items. Our 6th speaker is Wendy Loveday. Can you hear us, Wendy?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
In your own time, Wendy.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and members. Regardless of what York Council say after I have finished speaking, These are the facts. York Police's legal opinion states that Uber are working in contravention of Section 46 of the 76 Act, which is the very act that underpins your taxi licensing policy. The police were ready to advise Uber drivers that they were breaking that law and asked them to leave York. The City Task Force inspector was briefed and good to go until the police met with York Council, and suddenly it all got hushed up and disappeared. Even the Uber drivers chatting with the staff at the whole road garages told the staff there that that was the end of the road for them in York. All that York Council had to do was box it off by stating that they would back the police, even though the need for a prosecution was extremely unlikely, as Uber drivers were prepared to leave York when approached by the police. Luckily for us, though, you, our elected members, didn't let it lie and insisted on bringing the police here to be questioned. You will not be party to political policing. As elected members, you have the right to change York Council's position, as it was not the position that you chose. It was the position that you were told you had to have. The position that you actually chose was in December 2017, when you refused to allow this toxic company to hold a York licence any longer. York Council won't challenge Uber because Uber have told them that they are legally working in York, and they've fallen for Uber's rhetoric. Remember, Uber lies all the time, and they are always only about the money. Uber never, absolutely never checks its drivers. So they never know who is really driving the Uber vehicle, nor do they safety check the vehicles. We all saw the state of the Uber cars in York last month when the police splashed photographs of dangerous Uber vehicles working in York all over Facebook and Twitter. Are you going to continue, members, to allow these dangerous Uber drivers and their vehicles to pick up York's tourists, students and residents? Or are you going to choose to back police action and force York Council to bend to your will rather than the other way around? Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Samantha Hunt, who's going to speak on item 7, and she's from Make It York. Can you hear me, Samantha?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. So I wanted to speak in support of allowing street trading activities to take place on St. Helen's Square for key events in the city, mainly Christmas. The square is an important junction with Coney Street leading from its southern corner, Lendal from the west, and both Blake Street and Stonegate from the north, with Davygate from the east. So with this in mind, being able to trade on St. Helen's Square is more about providing a great festive welcome to the city, given the central location of St. Helen's Square. The trading units and stalls that we have planned for that area would not impact upon established Christmas activities that take place in St. Helen's Square, such as the Christmas tree and also the Christmas carols that are in front of the Mansion House. The size and position of the trading stalls, as well as the goods to be offered and sold, would also be aggrieved by the City of York's Event Safety Advisory Group. Our first port of call in utilising the space, which I understand to be a maximum of 4 chalets, would be offering it to businesses who already border St. Helen's Square and thereby won't be creating any trading conflict. If anything, it will be supporting that offering. We would work closely with surrounding businesses to complement their existing festive offers. And out of the 4 permitted trading units, the plans for this year is only for one of them to sell alcohol, and that's of the mulled wine sentiment. Reference to the counter-terrorism precautions for St. Helen's Square. This sits inside the existing CT perimeter And we would, alongside that, however, liaise with the North Yorkshire Police Counter-Terrorism Unit to ascertain the measurements that we need to put in place in order to make the events obviously comply with that area. Thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your comments. They'll be taken into account when we discuss that item. Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers this evening for their contributions. And we now move on to agenda item 4, which Matt will introduce, and we'll then hear from Superintendent Butterfield. Thank you for coming this evening. We're very grateful for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. So this report outlines the council's position in relation to out-of-town private hire operators and drivers. It follows the extensive coverage given to this issue by this committee and indeed by the executive in 2019. The council's position is based on that of Leo Sharolambides, who is leading counsel in this field. In short, absolutely nothing has changed. The City of York Council said if the situation changed, it would review its position accordingly, but nothing has changed. And the reasons for all of this are given in the report, and I don't propose to go through it again. It's there for you all to see. As the Chair has mentioned, my police colleagues are here. They've been invited on the basis at the meeting on the 22nd of February 2021. We heard that the police were considering engaging with out-of-town drivers and asking them to return back to the area from which they are licensed. And members asked officers to formally clarify the position with the police, which we did. And the response is in the pack. And the police explain that the position is that taxi licensing matters are firmly for the local authority or licensing authority to deal with. And as you've said, Chair, Superintendent Lindsay Butterfield is here to help discuss further. I don't propose to say any more than that. I'll throw it open to questions. Lindsay wants to say anything.
Would you like to make your comments, Superintendent?
Thank you, Chair. I think just to echo what Matt's already covered, the North Yorkshire Police position on this matter remains unchanged. Our view is that taxi licensing and any associated enforcement activity sits firmly with the local authority. We will support and act within our powers, for example, the Road Traffic Act or when the COVID regulations were in place. But outside of that, this is a matter for City of York Council rather than North Yorkshire Police. We won't be leading on any taxi licensing matters or enforcement, and nor will we override your position or seek to take any unilateral action. Again, more than happy to take any questions on our position.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any questions? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, mic's working. I think at the very outset, we just need to clarify that apparently we've had another legal opinion as to the legality of the Uber operation in York, this time that was obtained by North Yorkshire Police, which certainly seems to be at odds with the legal opinion that York Council are working to, which again is completely at odds with a lot of the legal opinion that the trade are working to. So I'd just like to ask the Superintendent, can you let us into this secret? Because I requested a copy of the legal opinion under an FOI and was refused. Can you let us in part or whole as to the legal opinion that North Yorkshire Police obtained?
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to share our legal advice. Legal consideration made by North Yorkshire Police in relation to this or any other matter would remain legally privileged, and therefore I'm not in a position to share that information this evening. That said, our position throughout this has remained unchanged. This is a matter for City of York Council and not North Yorkshire Police to lead on.
Right, well, if I can try and phrase the question in another way. We've heard from Wendy Loveday, who I'm sure most of us certainly hold with quite a degree of respect. And we understand that when she speaks, it's usually from a very informed position. When she went public with the North Yorkshire Police legal opinion, had you discussed this with her?
Chair, I don't think it's appropriate to discuss individual conversations that may or may not have taken place. Needless to say, the legal advice that we have obtained has supported our current position, but I don't propose that we go into individual complaints or conversation with North Yorkshire Police.
Thank you. Any more questions for Super? No, Councillor Waters.
I've plenty of questions. Well, if that's the case, are you quite content with the publicity that Wendy Loveday obtained, that it was a true factual piece that was written? I think it was in York Mix at the time. Yes or no?
Mr. Waters, I'm not in a position today to answer questions about individual correspondence with members of the public that have taken place outside of this forum. It's not appropriate.
Did you put the city centre inspector on notice to get his teams in readiness for an operation?
Again, Chair.
Chair, Councillor Waters, I think you've taken this as far as it's going to go.
I always realise when you don't get answers to questions, there's a reason why people don't want to answer them.
The superintendent has given you the answers that she's going to give you.
No, she's deflected the question. She hasn't answered anything, Chair, with respect.
Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. I hope this microphone's on. It's not on, is it? Oh, there we go. We're on. Okay. Thank you, Chair. Mic difficulties. You know, with respect, I do think Councillor Waters has got some unanswered questions, and it does seem a little bit of a waste in everybody's time. If we can't get somewhere further on today, I'll try and ask a question. Because, Chair, I do believe that Uber are operating in contravention to the law, and I support those public speakers that have made those points. So I'd like to ask Mr. Boxall why we as an authority are not upholding our standards that we have democratically agreed by not licensing Uber in this local authority. How can we enforce our position, and what is the relationship between the council and the police that's either stopping this from happening or could kickstart that process? And I suppose the second part of my question, Chair, would be to the police to say, would North Yorkshire Police enforce the City of York Council's decision if it asked you to enforce our licensing policy? Thank you, Chair.
Martin?
Yeah, there was quite a bit to that, Councillor. So forgive me if I don't catch it all. Happy to address anything I missed. The City of York Council's position has been very clear for, well, at least since 2019, when it was approved by the executive, based on the opinion of Leo Shawalambides. And it is, in a nutshell, this: Uber aren't operating here. They don't operate here. You're effectively booking a Bradford cab, or wherever it might be, through the Bradford operator in a Bradford vehicle with a Bradford driver. It so happens to be taking you around York. Now, we might all have an opinion whether we think that's right or wrong, but it is lawful. And it's not just the City of York Council's executive that thinks that. As I say, Leo Shawalambides thinks that. The Department of Transport think that, based on the following the review of the Law Commission. We've seen plenty of magistrates' cases go through, in fact, all the way up to the Court of Appeal, where they've upheld Uber's operation. It's widely regarded as being the position. Indeed, you heard at the last committee, or at the committee on the 27th of October, when Gerald Gourier came here, he reiterated that exact position. He said, and I've got it here, an operator licensed remotely from York can use cars and vehicles licensed by the same authority as licensed him to fulfill the booking, which start and finish in York. He'd effectively changed his tune. So even Gerald Gourier agrees now that that is the position. So I think City of York Council, in fairness, has been very consistent. And we've always said, if the situation changes, of course, we'll review it. We haven't had any information to suggest the situation's changed. And therefore, there is nothing for us to enforce. Now, what we do is enter an arrangement with our colleagues in West Yorkshire, whereby we have joint enforcement responsibility for the Uber vehicles that are here. So we can do things like check their vehicles, etc., speak to their drivers, check that they've got the badges that are required. But that's through internal arrangements with our colleagues in West Yorkshire, because it is their vehicle that is operating here, not ours. You'll recall that we have made a decision that we don't think Uber are fit and proper to operate here. They want to operate here, but we've determined that they're not fit and proper to do so. So they don't. They operate in other authority areas. Their vehicles happen to be carrying out the journeys here.
Anything else, Councillor Myers?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the answer. I guess the second part of my question was directed to North Yorkshire Police, and if that could be answered, please.
Of course it can, Chair. So in a number of situations where North Yorkshire Police aren't necessarily the lead enforcement organisation, we would always support our colleagues and our partners by gathering evidence if it was appropriate to do so, to pass on to the relevant authority for enforcement purposes. On this particular matter, City of York Council's position is currently very clear that they believe that Uber are operating here lawfully. Therefore, it would be inappropriate of us to send any information on for enforcement, because that's clearly not appropriate in the circumstances. If that position was to change in the future, of course, we would reconsider our approach. But right now, that wouldn't be an appropriate way forward.
Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions. The first one is to the police. When the COVID restrictions were on, there were still Uber taxis in York. Were you stopping them at that time?
I can't say that we were specifically targeting Uber drivers. However, I'm aware that my teams were engaging during the periods where we were in the lockdown, particularly the first lockdown. There was quite a lot of media coverage in terms of vehicles being stopped and drivers being asked to articulate the purpose of their journey. I don't have the information to hand to say whether or not Uber drivers were included within that, but it's likely that if they were operating in the city at the time, they would have been. There was never any specific activity taken in relation to Uber drivers.
Thank you.
Councillor Melling.
Thank you, Chair. I'm finding it difficult to understand all this and feel like I'm being fully informed when we're being denied access to any legal opinions. We haven't seen the legal opinion of Leo, Cheryl Lambides. We haven't seen the legal opinion obtained by the police. Other people are forming an opinion and then telling us why that's their opinion and saying it's based on a legal opinion, but we're not being able to see the actual legal opinions. So I'd appreciate more of an explanation from council officers and from the police about why we're not being allowed to see any legal opinions.
I think the superintendent has explained that. Nothing further to add to that?
No, our position, I believe, is also articulated in the report, but any legal considerations that we would make internally as an organisation would be subject to legal privilege, and therefore, unfortunately, not in a position to share that this evening.
Yes, Councillor Melling.
And what about the council's legal opinion? Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, that is publicly available. It's from the licensing committee and the executive back on that date I mentioned, was it 27th of September. It's a link to it actually in the background papers in the report. The council's opinion is there to be seen. It is on the internet, as is Gerald Gourier's opinion that initiated that. The only one I think that's not there was a second legal opinion that came through late in the day, which was put to committee in Salmon papers, because we didn't have the consent of the author of that document to put it into the public domain. So the council's opinion is certainly there, and Gerald Gourier's opinion is there, as to, of course, is Gerald Gourier's commentary on the triple licensing rule, as it's become known, from the York Cars hearing that was undertaken in October last year, which, as I say, he seemed or appeared to be conceding. Well, it didn't appear, he was conceding that Uber and out-of-town operators could work as they are.
Councillor Waters and then Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I can well remember speaking from the floor in 2017 when another version of the licensing committee was, how shall I say, encouraged by the council's legal opinion and ignored it. Uber were described as being not fit and proper to all the licence in York at that time. I was then a member of this committee in 2019 when, as you mentioned, the legal opinion went up to the executive. That's the position of the council through the executive. It's certainly not a position of all the members of this committee, I can assure you. But with respect, Matt, what has changed quite significantly is the fact that the police have obtained a legal opinion that runs contrary to the legal opinion that this council is being guided to work to. A legal opinion that, because it runs contrary and is embarrassing, we are not allowed to see. That's what's changed.
Councillor Wells.
Thank you. Page 11.18. What I'm wanting to know is the DFT have decided that they're not going to change the law, and the report that opinion is divided. Do we know which opinions are divided?
Yes, so the Department of Transport engaged in a process following on from the Task and Finish Group recommendations to look at changing the law, and they undertook a consultation exercise with well, all sorts of interested parties, but included amongst them were the trade. And of course, there is nothing new in the way Uber are operating. The case law in here goes back to 1997, albeit it was done by the telephone in those days. What's new or different with Uber is that you book it on an app. And there are as many firms, or there are significant numbers of firms that use these provisions as opposed to don't use the provisions, that meant opinion was divided. And so as a result of that, as there was many people for it as against it, and also users, you know, there are plenty of people who like using Uber. As opinion was divided, they thought there was no need to continue with this piece of work to change the law.
Thank you, everybody. Can I have my little say now? When Councillor Waters referred to the discussions when we decided that Uber wasn't a fit and proper organisation to run taxis in York, I asked the Uber representative at the time, who was then saying how environmentally sensitive it was that their operation was. I asked him, how did he figure that with the fact that taxis, Uber drivers were coming many miles to come to York and return from where they came? He didn't have an answer to that. So I find the government's decision not to look at changing the law very disappointing. To me, it relates strongly to climate change. We are, in the way that the government are now acting, they're encouraging drivers to drive long distances to come and seek trade. I don't think that is compatible with what's happening with climate change. But we can't make the government change. The executive have written to them asking for a change in the law. They've denied that, and at the moment they're not going to change. It is disappointing, I agree. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. So this Local Government Miscellaneous Act 1976, Section 46, 1D, which keeps being referred to, says that no person shall in a controlled district operate any vehicle as a private hire vehicle without having an operator's licence. And so it's been explained that because of the triple licence law, that means it's legal to start and end a journey in the restricted district, whatever it's called. But I think the issue isn't about where the journey starts and ends. It's about where the driver and the vehicle is when they accept the job, and it's about applying for trade in the area. So is that covered in the legal opinion?
Yeah, that section means that you can't operate in this area, and of course Uber don't operate here. We've said that they're not fit and proper to operate here. They don't have a license to operate here. They don't operate here. They operate from Bradford, and their vehicles happen to be carrying people around here. They don't, within the terms of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, operate here.
What is that view based on? Because I think the law was written before apps were as, when the view of what an operator was different. So has there been a definitive ruling on that and what it means to operate and whether they are operating in York or not? Because so far I think you've only mentioned magistrates courts, which can't set legal precedent.
No, apologies. It's the chief magistrate that made that ruling in that particular case. But the term operate is defined within the Act, and it's there. It comes from there. The Uber do not operate here. That's the position.
Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to say thanks to officers for pulling the report together, and thank you to the police for attending today. This committee, I think, requested that we write to the Secretary of State to ask them to look into the legislation. They've obviously gone away and looked at it and decided not to do anything, but I just wonder if we need to, as a committee, write again and say that our opinion hasn't changed, our opinion's not divided. I was speaking to a taxi driver the other day and was explaining how difficult the last few months and years have been with COVID, and I think we should stick up for York's local taxi drivers. I have huge sympathy with them. I wonder if this committee can agree to write yet again and say York stands firm. Thank you.
Sandra, is that within our remit to write to ministers?
Chair, yes, I don't see why you couldn't resolve to delegate that task to officers. The council's done it before. I think you said it was the executive that wrote. Is that correct, Leslie? Yeah.
Councillor Waters and Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like it specifically minuted that I'm deeply unhappy at the reticence of the police to share their legal opinion with this committee, even if it was a case of sharing it on pink pages.
Thank you.
I'd like that recorded.
That's noted. Councillor Galvin.
Chairman, despite everything we've heard today, I think we've got to remember legal opinion. Two barristers will always have a point of conflict. That's what courts are all about. And if you are supporting one side, the barrister, lawyer who's supporting you, you agree with, and you disagree with the opposing side, that's what the law is all about. And I'm not terribly concerned that barrister A doesn't agree with barrister B. What I'm concerned is that the barrister, this authority, has paid, I suspect, a reasonably substantial fee to give us his advice. And I think we need to take that advice, because if we don't, we might as well come down to the EBOR meeting next week and put all the money on the GGs. That's number one. Number two, the law may well be unpleasant. And I have to tell you, as somebody, and I've said this before, many, many years ago, long before Uber and even mobile phones, drove private hire and in fact a public hire vehicle many, many moons ago. And I always used to feel badly done to when something happened that hit my particular sector. But the truth of the matter is, the law seems to be pretty clear. And the fact that we don't like it ain't going to change it. And I have every sympathy with the local taxi drivers, private hire and public Hackney carriages. I have every sympathy with them. But the truth of the matter is, there's not what we can do. And to start pilloring the police, it's not, quite frankly, I have a sneaking feeling, and perhaps the superintendent put her fingers in there. I think somebody dropped a clanger at the police, quite frankly. But that's by the by. We're none of us infallible, and we can all make mistakes. And I personally believe that the report that we've got in front of you is a fair and true reflection of the situation. We're not asked to vote on it. All we're asked to do is to note it. So, Chairman, let's note it, because we ain't going to win this argument, and move on to the next item.
Councillor Melling.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for the police, if that's all right. I can't quite see you, but I did want to say thank you for coming, so we can so we can have this conversation. At the start, when you first spoke, you explained the police's position and said that it was unchanged. I was just wondering, like, unchanged since when? When was the current position in its current form first kind of decided on?
Thank you. So it was before my time in York, unfortunately, but I understand there have been previous conversations between City of York Council and North Yorkshire Police in relation to our view on taxi licensing and enforcement. And at that time, it was clearly articulated that we deemed that the local authority were correctly the lead agency. Therefore, having reviewed our position at the end of last year, I can confirm that nothing has changed. I hope that helps.
Yes, Councillor Melling.
Thanks. Yeah, but it does make me wonder why the police sought this legal opinion. Was it because the police were exploring what other powers and enforcement options there might be? Or, yeah, I'm just wondering if that's the position and it's unchanged. I'm just wondering why the police went to the effort and expense of getting a legal opinion on it.
So I think what I can share with the group is that we were contacted and asked for our view. And given that any prior involvement we'd had was a number of years ago, it was timely and appropriate to reconsider our position and undertake a full review of all of our powers in relation to this issue. So what could be available through the Road Traffic Act, through the COVID regulations, or whether any of the offences that have been outlined this evening would be appropriate for North Yorkshire Police to take the lead on. And it was deemed that in line with our previous position, that would not be appropriate. This is firmly a matter for the local authority. Clearly, if there are construction and use offences with the vehicles, road traffic offences being committed, or as I said, when they were in place, any COVID regulation breaches, then yes, we would absolutely have the autonomy and the power to act on those occasions. But in relation to the operation of Uber in York, that's not a matter for us to be involved with.
Thank you very much. I think we've asked a lot of questions of Superintendent. Thank you once again for coming this evening. We're very grateful for that. Thank you. We're asked to note the report. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. And it's just about the proposal, actually. I think second that proposal, I think is probably the least we could do. If I got it right, that we're to write a letter to the Secretary of State for Transport to say that we're disappointed that they're no longer minded to change the law, and to reiterate York's position. Is that right? I'd firmly support that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Excellent, thank you. I was waiting for a seconder for that, so thank you. Yes, Councillor Wells.
Could we also copy it into the Secretary of State for Climate Change?
Absolutely, yes, good thinking. Yes, Councillor Waters.
Will that letter be circulated amongst members before it is finally signed off to go? People may wish to make an input or comment on how the letter's drafted.
Writing a letter by committee is always...
It's always difficult, yeah, but if it's the committee's name going to it, I think we all ought to see it before it goes.
I think we might be able to let you see it, but how far we go from there, that's fine, Councillor Waters.
I'm sure the Secretary of State was quick.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Superintendent. Thanks for coming. Can we now move on to agenda item 5? And this is yours, Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks members' determination of application to renew a sex establishment licence for a sex shop which has been made under the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1982. Schedule 3, control of sex establishments, in respect of the adult shop 70B Gillygate, York. The options open to members are to grant the renewal of the licence as requested, renew the licence with modified additional conditions imposed by the licensing committee, or option 3, refuse the application to renew on one of the mandatory grounds or one or more of the discretionary grounds. That's a very brief overview, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Galvin.
Chair, I seem to recollect this came to committee last year around about 12 months' time. And I don't think anything's changed from then. And let me make it perfectly clear, I have no particular desire to enter or look in or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, Chair, as there's been no change, no complaints, I'll move option 1, I think.
Councillor Melly.
Chair, I think Councillor Wells had her hand up for me.
Councillor Melly, and then Councillor Wells after you.
All right, great, thank you. Yes, I agree with what's just been said. There's been no change in circumstances, no change to the premises or the manager or policy or anything. It's just coming to the committee as a formality. So I hope we can get through this agenda item quite quickly. I was just wondering, I think it's a question for officers really. Option 2 is to amend the conditions slightly. Is it minimal hassle just to slightly change the wording and conditions to make them more inclusive in terms of gender? Just replace he, her with they?
Sorry, that didn't work correctly. We wouldn't be able to change the conditions actually within the sex establishment policy, because we would have to go out for consultation. We could only amend the conditions that are actually attached to the specific conditions attached to the licence itself.
So that would fall within option 2, just to change a couple of words.
If you look at page 29 of the report, that's a copy of the licence, the current licence. So the schedule at the bottom, they're the 3 independent conditions that are attached to this licence. This specific licence, the standard conditions, as I say, they form part of the policy. So we wouldn't be able to amend those unless we amended the entire policy.
Councillor Wells.
In that case, can I second option 1 then?
Thank you, Councillor Melly.
I was just interested why the limit to the number of sexual entertainment venues doesn't apply to sex shops. It was just I've no problem with it. I just wondered why, what the rationale was behind it.
Prior to the implementation of the sex establishment policy, we did a very wide consultation, and within that consultation we asked, well, that was one of the questions we asked, should we have a maximum number of sexual entertainment venues, should we have a maximum number of sex shop, etc. And from the results of that consultation, there was no concern about sex shops.
Thank you. Well, it's been proposed by Councillor Galvin, seconded by Councillor Melly, that we agree to recommendation 1. Is everybody in agreement with that? Thank you. We'll move on to item 6, Hackney Carriage Fairs. Leslie.
Thank you again, Chair. This, as Councillor Melly mentioned when she raised some points within the minutes of the last meeting, this report is asking members to consider some objections that were received after we advertised the table of fares for the variation of the table of fares in respect of the hire of City of York's Hackney carriage vehicles. The report also asked members to determine whether to make any changes to the proposed table of fares. that was brought before you on the 26th of April. We have received 2 objections. They are actually both from the same person, but they've made 2 separate objections with regards to the increase in fares. So the options open to members are to determine the table of fares as proposed by the Hackney Carriage Association and specified in the table of fares to come into operation from the 1st of September, or to modify the variation to the table of fares.
Any questions for Leslie? Any comments or proposals? Councillor Melly.
It's always tricky with these kind of statutory processes where it's not a consultation period, it's just an objection period. So when you don't receive any objections, you don't know if there's been a high engagement but nobody had any objections, or whether there was really low engagement, and that's why there were so few objections, which is why I think the committee felt like it should be advertised, not just the statutory minimum of posting it once in one newspaper, but sharing it on social media and that sort of thing. Did that happen? Was it posted on social media? And if not, do you mind explaining why not?
Sorry, my mic doesn't seem to want to work. We put it on we actually, because of the date of this committee change, we were supposed to be having committee in June, a few weeks ago. We actually advertised the variation to the table of fares twice because of the implementation date. We've got to agree within a certain length of time. So the advert went into the press twice, as it's legally required to do so. It went onto the council website twice. It went onto the council notice board at West offices twice, and we asked the comms team to put out social media messages with regarding the consultation.
Okay. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered what officers' thoughts were to the suggestion, well, it's on page 75, one of the commentators to the increases put forward the suggestion of going on tariff 2 all day instead of having 3 tariffs, you know, the race day tariff.
Sorry, councillor, which page did you say? 75. When I actually did the comparison of fares, which on page 77, because even though the fare on a race day does look quite high, you do actually get further distance before the meter does its next drop. So by going on to tariff 2, because I haven't done the comparisons, it could actually end up being more expensive being on tariff 2 on a race day than it would be actually on tariff 3. So without doing the comparisons, I couldn't fully answer that question. And the race day tariff is only for journeys to and from the race course. If you were picked up at, for example, at York Station and asked to be taken home to Hackney, the race day tariff doesn't apply. It is only for journeys that are to and from the race course on a race day.
Yes, Councillor Waters.
I think the commentator had explained that on page 75. I just wondered for clarity whether it was worth considering.
Members can consider
absolutely.
that. That's one of the considerations you can make under option 2.
Councillor Galvin.
Chairman, am I right in thinking that we've only had one objection following all the publicity that it's had, although you class it as 2 because the person had put 2 different issues in? Only the one objection.
That's correct, yes.
One objection. And the starting point was that the Hackney Carriage and private hire groupings, organisations, had requested these increases.
That's correct, yes.
In that case, Chair, I'm going to move the appropriate.
Councillor Melly.
What's it? Because quite frankly,
Noted, Councillor Galvin, that you've moved the recommendation.
I just don't understand why.
Councillor Melly.
Turning on. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, we're legally required to consider all objections, and I have one more consideration, please. In the objection, a specific point is made about the kind of psychological difference between £5.80 and £6. And although it's only a 20 pence difference, it kind of ticking over to being the next kind of full pound number, making it seem like a bigger increase. So, and the objection also says that, is the objection saying that it has to be to the nearest 10 pence? It couldn't be £5.99, it would have to be either £5.90. That's the highest rate it can be below £6, is that right?
The meters have to be calibrated to do the drops as the vehicle progresses, so it drops to the next, with the next mile or the next amount of distance. To be quite honest, and I'm looking at Matt here because I'm seeing if he has any further information about meters, but I don't know. I honestly can't answer if they can only be dropped in 10 pence.
Sorry, Leslie, I can't help either.
No.
Right, Councillor Galvin's proposed the recommendation. Yeah, does anybody like to second that? Councillor Waters was.
I'll certainly second it, but I just think we need to caution when people do make sensible comments that they're not just completely dismissed in such a flippant manner, which probably explains why we've only had one response to this. It's not unfair at all.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you. Right, it's been proposed and seconded. Any more questions or comments before we move on? Councillor Hook.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's on page 53.2, and having raised the issue of climate change with Uber, they do seem to imply, and I think I quite agree, that if it's more lucrative to go into the big vehicles, which pollute more and are less green, then that might be a retrograde step that's not pro-climate change. Well, it is pro-climate change and not against it.
Thank you. Any more comments? Well, it's been proposed and seconded. Can we see a show of those in favour, please? Any against? Any abstentions? So that's all one against, I think, Fiona. Councillor Hook. Right, can we move on to agenda item 7, street trading in St Helens Square? Leslie.
Yes, as mentioned by Samantha Hunt, one of the speakers earlier, this report is asking members for approval to allow street trading activities to take place in St Helens Square during the St Nicholas Fair Christmas market. This request has been made by Make It York as part of the St Nicholas Fair trading event. The options open to members are detailed on pages 84 and 85 of the report. Option 1 is to permit street trading activities to take place on St Helens Square with the following restrictions in place. I won't read out all of those restrictions. I'm sure members have already read them. Option 2, permit street trading activities to take place on the square with alternative restrictions. Or option 3, refuse to allow street trading on St Helens Square.
Thank you, Leslie. Any questions? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. In option 1, it states that street trading activities are only permitted on St Helen Square for a maximum period of 6 weeks per year, not starting before 12th of November and ending before Christmas Day. Is that ending the street trading activities and packing up all the equipment prior to Christmas Day?
That would be the street trading activity itself. So if members could determine to amend that if they wanted the activity to be fully removed from the square.
Given the location and what it's used for at Christmas and New Year and such like, I do think it's important that it's not just the activity stopping, it's all the paraphernalia that is cleared before Christmas Day.
Yep, it can be amended to that effect, Leslie. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be for one single continuous period of up to 6 weeks, or 6 weeks in total with gaps in between, so possibly spreading over a longer period?
No, it would be for one single period. It would be for the St Nicholas Fair Christmas market event, so for that pure 6 week period.
Councillor Galvin.
Yeah, I have some reservations about this. St Helens Square does sort of play quite a part at Christmas in the civic life, as you well know, and the Christmas trees in there and various other bits and pieces. And quite frankly, I'm not sure that St Helens Square is the right place to have a Christmas market at all, irrespective of whether it's the day before or whatever. And my own view is that we should refuse this application. Now, I don't know whether anybody else is going to support that, but that's my personal opinion. I'm not terribly happy.
Thank you. Councillor Hunter.
I actually agree with Councillor Galvin. Could I just ask, is the stalls that used to go on Lendl, on Lendl by Judges Lodgings, is that not going there anymore? Is it sort of proposed not to go there and to go to St Helens Square instead?
I don't know the full scope of the Make It York's plans for this year's or future years St Nick Fair event, so this could be additional to the trading places that are already established.
Looks additional, Councillor Hunter. Councillor Melly.
Is this for 1 year or is it indefinite?
The proposal is option 1 is indefinite.
Yes, Councillor Melly.
Actually, no, I was going to move on to debate. I haven't got any more questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Waters.
Well, just following up from that then, obviously it would be possible to reword option 1 to make it a trial for 1 year.
Yeah. It would. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. I think that makes sense as well, the amending the option to make it a trial, so I'd support that to be inserted into option 1. And I'm generally in favour. The question I would have liked to ask is, it might have got answered by this public speaker from Make It York, and it's about who will operate the stalls on St Helens Square. And I think she made reference to existing businesses in that vicinity being offered those pictures. I just wonder if you could clarify that. And my second question is about the road and access. I can't find the paragraph and I haven't annotated it, but it mentions in the report about, because the layout's not yet been agreed, then the access on the road could be stopped. So I just wonder if there's some clarity around that, please.
Yeah, the lady from Make It York, I don't know who's definitely going to take the stalls on the square. She did mention when she spoke that they would be offered to the traders in the St Helens Square area. One of the reasons that within option 1 and the restrictions that I stated that it needs the approval of the Event Safety Advisory Group, as the rest of St Nicholas Fair does go before the Event Safety Advisory Group, is some of the things that they take into consideration is how the stalls are laid out, that they're laid out safely, that there's still adequate access and flow around the square. Highways are represented on the Event Safety Advisory Group, so they will take matters like that into consideration. Clear access will, of course, still need to be maintained for the shops that are on the square. It shouldn't impact the shops' trading activities as well. So hopefully, you know, all those things will be taken into consideration by the Event Safety Advisory Group, who, as part of the Christmas market event, if this area is included in the Christmas market event, will expect Make It York to put forward an operation plan and detailing how all aspects of the market will work and operate safely.
Thank you. We seem to have different opinions on this. I think Councillor Galvin proposed refusal.
Yes, I did, Chair. And having heard what Leslie's just said, if you think about all the bits that they're going to keep free, I think it's a nightmare situation, quite frankly. And so I really do strongly believe that we should refuse this application.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Hunter's seconding. Right. Anybody want to speak on that? I think what we'll do is work through Councillor Galvin's proposal, and if that fails, we'll then move on to possible amendments to the proposal. So anybody want to speak on Councillor Galvin's proposal? Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree, and I'll be supporting that proposal. I have concerns about that the same has been raised by the police about it being an important protest and rally and gathering space. And although one of the conditions is that another suitable space will be found, suitable doesn't mean as good in terms of size or centrality or accessibility. And I think that right to gather is important. And also with the condition about it not impacting on established pavement licenses. But yeah, users of pavement licenses aren't the only pavement users, and we've already heard from public speakers at previous meetings of this committee and other meetings as well about the impact that pavement licenses are having, particularly on disabled people. So I'm concerned that there isn't really space for these 4 stalls and pavement licenses and the kind of space that's needed, especially when there's crowds, for people to be able to actually move and use the pavement space. And the only argument I've heard in favour of it is that it would provide a festive welcome to the city, but actually that square is already always an amazing festive welcome to the city, with the tree there and with the amount of effort that local businesses put into decorating the shop fronts and making that square as beautiful as it is. So I feel like this doesn't, I'm not convinced of the benefits that this would bring, but it seems to have downsides that don't make it worth it.
Any other comments from anybody? No, so can we take a vote on Councillor Galvin's proposal to refuse permission? Those in favour of Councillor Galvin's motion? 1. Councillor Galvin, Councillor Hook, Councillor Melly.
5, Chair.
Councillor Waters, Councillor Hunter and Councillor Pearson. Those against? Councillor Myers and Councillor Wells. So that's refused, Leslie. Thank you. Can we move on to agenda item 8? Update on taxi vehicle testing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll take this one. This report outlines the City of York Council's vehicle testing arrangements for taxis. It gives the results of the recent tests and plans for further improvement, including consultation on improving the vehicle licensing conditions. Again, I don't propose to go through this in detail as it's all in the report. Perhaps just a couple of points to note. The full testing is now undertaken by Fleet Services as opposed to prior to January, they used to undertake the mechanical examination, and the taxi licensing officers would undertake the checks on conditions, the comfort and the signage, etc., of the vehicles. That changed, and the garage is now taking on the entire examination. And they have been recording the results of the tests they've been undertaken, and they're in the table in paragraphs 7 and 9, and you'll see that 2/3 of the vehicles are actually passing first time, and just over half those that do fail are actually charged a retest fee. So that means that a lot of the failures are for relatively minor matters that don't need to go back onto the ramp to be checked, and there's no charge for those retests. I just want to stress, for the benefit of any doubt, there's no financial incentive to the council for failing drivers. The charges are set on a cost recovery basis, and any excess recovery or under recovery that should occur, it goes to the dedicated taxi account. And there's a list of further improvements that we think we can make to make the service even better in there. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any question, member? Councillor Melly.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for this report. It was interesting. Thanks. I'm just wondering if this level of testing, including like the frequency of the tests and the standards and that sort of thing, are comparable with other local authorities, not just neighbouring local authorities, but around the country. Is this pretty standard, or is there quite a bit of variation?
Yeah, I'd say it's fairly standard. There are some authorities that perhaps require a little less, and some authorities will go wholly on an MOT test, but it's not unusual for local authorities to actually want to test the vehicles themselves, and that's why obviously we say that in our policy, and that's as a result that's what we do.
Any other questions? Yes, again, Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. So I saw on social media that there was a joint operation a few weeks ago between the council and the police, stopping vehicles, private hire vehicles. There was a Facebook post mentioned 16 vehicles. I've forgotten the numbers now. Quite a few of them needed improvements or had their licenses removed because of the safety of the vehicles and them not passing tests. Do you know how many of those vehicles were licensed in York and so were subject to this testing, and how many of them were not licensed in York, out of town vehicles? I've heard it's two, that 2 of them were, of these 16 vehicles that were stopped in York, only 2 of them are actually licensed in York and subject to this testing.
No, I'm afraid that's not right. The majority of the vehicles were York vehicles that failed that test. So that's what we do in addition to these tests. We also carry out periodic tests with DVSA and the police, to check the condition as they are on the road. And we do that from time to time, maybe 2-3 times a year. But yeah, I'm afraid that on this occasion, the majority of the vehicles that failed were York.
Councillor Melly.
So the majority of those vehicles that were out operating, carrying passengers, had passed these safety tests and were considered safe to be on the road, but then just through an operation where they were randomly stopped and inspected, it was 16 vehicles were found not to be safe and not to meet even the minimum safety requirements.
Sorry, Councillor, I didn't mean to speak over you. That's exactly right, and that's exactly why we do this. Of course, the taxis do a lot of miles, and you can find yourself with an unroadworthy vehicle in between the tests, which is absolutely why we do these intermittent checks as well on a random basis.
Councillor Waters.
Just one question, Matt, around paragraph 13. How soon will this waiting area be be ready if it's decided to go ahead with that. Bearing in mind the correspondence I sent you some time ago.
We haven't got a date for it. They're looking at the best position to put a dedicated waiting facility, and obviously they want to put the video camera up so you can actually see the vehicles being inspected. I did go and check the waiting area for that's used. I'm not quite sure it was as bad as was suggested in the report. There are a few chairs, but I'm not sure it was as bad as described. Certainly, I didn't see it in as bad a condition as it was described in the report. I've got to say.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, we're asked to note the report, and that's the final item of business for this evening. I've got no other business, so declare the meeting closed. Thank you all for coming.